Relates to Foodlink. I believe he's on Manitou Road, and we will take you to that press conference right now. Let's listen in.
The owner of this really great, magnificent space here, really coming together to make this happen and make sure that Foodlink continues to have the resources that it needs and the space that it needs to be able to feed our community and keep people healthy and safe where they are at home. And I'd like to address and talk a little bit about why this was necessary today as well. You know, at the convention center, and actually over the last several weeks, we've been looking at sites across this community as we're watching the curve and watching what happens with our hospitalizations and our ICU usage through both hospital systems. We've been looking at sites for the phase 4 of the surge capacity to make sure that there's enough hospital beds and ICU units to be able to serve everyone here in our region. And we really are a region. It's not even just Monroe County. It's the whole region that the hospital systems serve, to make sure there's enough space if we need that phase 4. And after evaluating a lot of sites, it looks like the most likely place that would meet those needs would be the convention center for a lot of different reasons. Where the location of where it is, the kitchen and bathroom and restroom facilities, its proximity to other hotels, a lot of things like that. And so that became, we think, right now is probably the most likely place. But I will say this. It doesn't look like, if you're looking at the curve, that we may even need that field hospital, but it's all about making sure we're prepared, because I am not going to put this community in a place where we're not prepared to serve every eventuality that we could have. And a potential field hospital to meet that surge capacity will always exist. If you look at the curve on where we've been, I think there's some good news, and there's also some reasons that we also need to be cautious. Obviously, if you look at the hospitalization numbers over the last several days here in Monroe County, but across the state, and I think, and I just saw some news reports today across the country, things do seem to be leveling out a little bit. Here in Monroe County, we're much more on a linear curve. If you think about the way we're growing each day in terms of new cases, you look at hospitalizations, ICU usage, we're pretty much on a linear curve, not an exponential curve. If we stay on this linear curve, we feel good about the fact that a field hospital may get pushed out or might not even be needed at all. The real issue, though, is going to be those ICU rooms and the ventilators, and making sure that the hospital systems have enough of those to meet the needs, not so much a field hospital. But if we start on an exponential curve and start doubling our numbers every 2 or 3 days, that's when that need is going to change. And so I say there's encouraging signs, because about 3 weeks ago, we put in place some very aggressive social distancing measures here in Monroe County and across the state. It's been happening, and it took that exponential curve and has made it a little bit more linear, because the public really has participated and helped out by staying home, obeying those executive orders, and really making sure that we stayed on that lower curve end, and that's where we are today. But the fact still remains that at any point, if we relax those social distancing measures right now, we could find ourselves on that exponential curve. That's why we keep talking. It sounds like a broken record, and I know this isn't easy for folks to do, but we really do need to keep our foot on the gas pedal when it comes to social distancing. We need to listen to the recommendations from our public health professionals. We need to listen to the recommendations from the CDC, and we need to follow those guidelines and guidance about keeping a 6-foot distance between each other, wearing a mask when you're out in public, making sure if you don't need to leave your home, do not leave your home unless you absolutely need to go out for one of those essential actions or services that you need to do or to complete. If you don't need to do that, please stay at home, because what we're doing has been seeing some signs of working over those weeks. What we did 3 weeks ago to change social distancing is the result that you're seeing today. And to extend that, what we do today is what you're going to see in 2 or 3 weeks from now. If we continue on the pace that we are with social distancing today, this will be the result that you see in 2 or 3 weeks. If we let our foot up off the gas pedal right now where we are, and we listen to against the advice of our public health professionals, we could start to see ourselves on an exponential curve. So right now, this is really about managing which curve we're on so the healthcare systems can keep up. So after we looked at various locations, and the convention center seems to be the most likely. It made a lot of sense, and a lot of folks in the community said, well, what we should do is make sure that convention center is available in the event that it might be needed. And the fact of the matter is, because an exponential curve can come at you fast and grow very quickly, you may only have a 2 to 3 week heads up that you're on an exponential curve and you might need it, and it takes about 2 to 3 weeks to set up a field hospital. So when I say I'm not going to leave this community in a position where we don't have enough hospital spaces or beds for our community, this is that planning process to make sure we are ready for phase 4 if and when we need to be in phase 4 of our surge plan. But like I said, I owe a lot of thanks right now to all of you at home and our whole community for taking seriously this notion of social distancing. And I again want to talk about how great this is of a partnership between the whole community coming together. The United Way, Foodlink, our friends at the Teamsters, Wegmans, the breweries, the owner of this facility. Every time there's a need in this community the last several weeks, we've seen a lot of people stepping up and coming together and ask how they can help. And this is just another really great example of that. And I'll also say this, we will come out of this on the other side. Nobody would like more than me to turn the lights back on, send everybody back to school, put everybody back to work. Nobody would like that more than me. But the fact still remains, if we do that too early and we do that too soon, the progress that we've made through our social distancing efforts will disappear very, very quickly, and we could find ourselves in a very bad situation, or well, make a bad situation even worse. So when it comes to schools and it comes to businesses and it comes to opening that all on, we're going to do a lot of work right now to figure out what that looks like, because I'd love nothing more than to give everybody the green light to move about the cabin, so to speak. But and we're going to start planning that, because I'm as anxious as you are to understand what that would look like and how we can do that and give you assurance that we will do that. We will someday be able to get back to a new normal and be able to go back to school and go back to work and turn this economy back on and the lights back on. We just don't know when. But what I can tell you is that when will come, so long as we follow the advice of our public health officials, we social distance ourselves, we double down on it right now, and we will get through this. And I talk about doubling down, one more thing just to say. Because you look at different curves, and I just want to underscore, what we do today and what we do to stay home today and socially distance ourselves today, the result of that is what we will see in 2 or 3 weeks. So if we want to see ourselves stay on this curve in the phase 1, phase 2 of the surge and not get to a field hospital, today is and now is the time to double down on that. So when we reach that peak of the curve in about 3 weeks or so, 4 weeks, it's not overwhelming our hospital systems, and we can do everything we can to keep people safe, because we also have lost too many people in this community. And I know I say a prayer every night for those that we've lost, and I offer my sympathy and condolences to all those families who are grieving today because they lost their loved ones. But it's not too late to prevent the greater loss from life, but we just need everyone's cooperation to do that. So, did you want to say anything, Julia or Foodlink, or does anybody have any questions for either one of us? We can take questions. Yeah. Sure.
Last night, 2 emails went out. One that said volunteer operations to make room for the overflow hospital, and then the second one came out and said almost the same thing, but ended with potential use by the county.
Right. Well, I think that was a release that was sent out, I think, by the United Way or Foodlink. What I'm telling you is what Monroe County's plan is. And the plan is to put aside the convention center for the potential use of a field hospital. That's what this is. And it makes sense to start that planning now in the eventuality that we will need it. This is what happens when you plan for large-scale problems like that. But we are still a couple weeks out from being able to pull the trigger, but we need to be able to pull the trigger at any moment's notice. Yeah. The county had never said that was a first choice. That was a place that we were looking at. Sure. Yep.
How many people in the case of it happening? How many patients would be housed there? Would it be COVID-19 patients?
Yeah, those details are still working out. It's fluid based on that. The latest thinking is that it would be a COVID facility, and it could stand up. Right now, the plan that we have in place we could pull a trigger on at any moment is about 250 beds, but that could obviously be expanded up. I would hope to around 800 to 1,000, but we would see where we come as we get to that. Right now, the hospital systems, we had laid out to be able to phase up a plan that would take us from where we are today, which was around 2,000 hospital beds system-wide, up to 4,000, and then plus an additional ramp up another 1,000 at a field hospital. Right now, we're right in phase 1, maybe coming into phase 2. And so right now, that's why we see some encouraging signs. We didn't know that we would be in that position 2 weeks ago. Because the other thing to think about when you look at curves and modeling, and this is where you see this in the governor's announcements and you see this from the White House, is that the models will change. And the reason the models change is because they're impacted by our behavior when we see those models. So when we see that those models could project here in Monroe County 5, 6, 7, 8,000 people hospitalized at a time, that impacts our behavior. And as it impacts our behavior, it lowers that curve. And so that's why these models change, but you still have to be prepared for the worst case scenario. But I would also challenge any notion that anyone has that because our numbers are starting to level a little bit, that we beat this and we can move on. That is absolutely not the case. If you listen to our public health professionals, what they'll tell you is that it's flattening because what we're doing is working. We need to continue to do that, but we also have to start planning for what it looks like to turn it back on again and let people start to relax. But that is not what we're going to do today. That's a future planning.
Does that planning include having some of those other locations that were looked at in your back pocket in case they're needed?
Right now, we're really just looking at the one. But if the need for that grows or we start to see that exponential, we'll have the ability to ramp up, to other spots. But right now, the convention center is where it is. They potentially could, which is why this was an attractive facility, because you're going to have doctors, nurses, healthcare professionals who, you see this in other parts of the country where, and even here in Rochester, where they don't want to go home to their families. Well, they want to go home, but they can't, and because they don't want to expose their family and loved ones. So having facilities nearby is helpful. The Clarion, yes, there are. Yep, I think as of this morning, I think there was 8 people there. Yep, this morning.
Does the county require or need additional staff members and equipment while this field hospital, if the field hospital is...
Yes. So, to ramp up the field hospital, it would require contract workers in consultation with the hospital systems. We're working it out with both of them. But we would obviously have to bring in additional personnel to staff it. And it would look a lot like a hospital. With a chief medical officer, you'd have a chief operating officer. All those plans are in place to do that. It would require, obviously, a lot of additional personal protective equipment, known as PPE, that we talk about. And it would require a lot of hospital beds, things like that. So what our teams have been working on with the hospitals and at our emergency operations center are those plans so that we have that. So in the event you have to pull a trigger, you can just pull the trigger and you've got the plan. The worst case scenario any community could be in is needing additional beds or field hospital and not having a plan in place to do it. Yeah, they've been consulted in the project going forward, and then ultimately how this gets, the trigger gets pulled on this will depend on the greater, need, I think, around the region, the country, the state, and here in Rochester. But we wanted to make sure that we were forward-looking and have that plan put together.
I know there's been some concern from some people about some of the resources that come down to New York City now. Is that causing any sort of concern for you these 8 years?
Well, no, like I've addressed this before, particularly around the ventilator situation. I am concerned about our need for ventilators in a few weeks. Right now, the hospitals have what they need to meet the need and the patients coming in. But as you're looking at the surge models, even on the lower end of that surge model, we're going to need all the ventilators that we have, and I think the hospitals are looking for more as well. So we're not that donor community right now, and you know, someday maybe we will be. We get through our peak and we start to come down and we have additional PPE, you have additional staff resources, you have additional, maybe we'd love nothing more than to be in a position of being a donor community to help our fellow residents all across the country. But right now, we're still in that position where we're growing. We haven't started going down the other end of the curve or anything like that. We're still growing. It's on a linear pace and model, not exponential, but we are still growing.
Do you foresee schools being able to open again?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to schools, the decision will be made and looked at, evaluated every couple of weeks. I find it, though, to be frank, very unlikely that schools will open again for the rest of this school year. And that's tough. I know, you know, I have two kids myself. They're 9 and 10 years old, and you know, if they're watching this at home right now, they're probably saying, "No, Dad, we're okay being at home." But I know they want to go back to school. I know their teachers miss them, the administrators meet them. My wife works in education as well in Gates Chi School District, and they are working around the clock, these teachers, to provide educational opportunities to the students and start to develop curriculum that can be done remotely. And so I know that's something nobody's ever done before. It's not going to be smooth. I know that, you know, there's probably some parents who are frustrated, some who think it's going great. But we all got to realize we're doing this for the first time. Everyone is. Our schools, our governments, our community-based organizations, our hospital systems, we're all doing this for the first time. We're learning as we go, and we got to do this together and be patient and work together, and that's how we'll come out of this. But we do need to prepare ourselves that this is going to take some time. And I'll say this particularly around schools, and this is how you will know, is that as we keep going up the curve, we're not going to allow those schools to reopen because we cannot let them be vectors for the spread of this disease. I think by shutting it down is how we were able to start flattening out the curve a little bit and make sure we're on that one scale. So we do not want to send them back too early. And so as you see that curve's continuing to grow, you know it's pushing out that start date, because once we start coming down off that curve, you're going to need a few incubation cycles of the disease to clear through before we'd be comfortable opening them back up. So it's possible, but I would say it's very unlikely. Anybody else? Awesome. Thank you all very much. And if anyone's still watching at home, thank you so much for your help and cooperation on this. And thank you to Foodlink. You guys are amazing. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, you're welcome. Okay. Thanks.
And we have been listening to Monroe County Executive Adam Bello discussing moving Foodlink's operations from the convention center in Rochester out to Manitou Road and Gates. We will take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll have News 8 at noon.